you?
I just saw Shang-Chi, and what can I say except everybody was kung fu fighting. Those cats were fast as lightning. In fact, it was a little bit frightening because they move with expert timing. Just to be clear, this isn't racist. Shang-Chi is known as the master of kung fu. Don't cancel me, please. Well, barely 2 months since we saw Black Widow on the big screen, we're back in cinemas again with the MCU with the release of Shang-Chi. And it really feels like they're kicking off Phase 4 in earnest here, because we've got a new hero, and it's not a prequel, and we've got, for the first time in a long time, a solo film for an unestablished character. It really feels like this is the start of something new. And if this is any indication of what Phase 4 of the MCU has to offer, then I'm still on board the Marvel hype train. Personally for me, Shang-Chi is a character I kind of only knew the basics of when it came to the comics, which is kind of a rarity for me when it comes to superhero films. And I think because of that, this was always going to be a bit of a fresh experience for me. But another thing that kind of factored into my enjoyment of the film, I think, is that the movie's marketing campaign felt a bit subdued, and that might have been because of the uncertainty of when it could be released or how it was going to be released, whether it be like day and date on Disney Plus and etc. It felt like the marketing was just a lot quieter this time, and normally for these blockbuster superhero films I feel oversaturated by the marketing, and sometimes it's very easy to feel like I've seen the whole thing and I know what to expect going into it. But this might be the first time in a long time where I went into a Marvel film not entirely sure of what to expect. And those two factors really played into the movie's favour with me. I do want to talk about the Marvel strategy and its success for a second, because I find it really interesting. I mean, they've done an excellent job at convincing people that their films occupy a wide range of genres, even though they basically all follow a pretty similar formula. And I say that now as a fan, but it always to me just felt like marketing talk. You know, this is a heist film, this is a political thriller. And this time around, we've got a fantastical martial arts film. And maybe it's because we haven't had an Origins film in a while, but to me this really did feel like it was more true to its genre than to the Marvel mold. That's not to say you can't lob some of the many critiques that other Marvel films get at this movie though, such as the sort of disconnected, overblown ending that kind of clashes with what came before it. It was a bigger problem for me with Black Widow. I think in this film at least the stakes felt relatively personal, so that it worked a little bit better. But it did make for a bit of a frustrating watch, because at first when they were setting up the ending I was like, oh, I like this. This is different. It's a bit understated. And then it got bigger, and then it got bigger again, and by the end it was back in the Marvel wheelhouse. Yet on the way to the end there's plenty that works, such as the action. The fighting, and I mean like the brawling in the MCU, has rarely been exceptional. It's generally just been serviceable. I mean, there's a reason that any time the fight scenes are any good, that 7 years later people are like, oh, I got Winter Soldier vibes. It's because the rest of the series hasn't really had much to hang its hat on when it comes to throwing a few fisticuffs. Less said about Iron Fist, the better.
The immortal Iron Fist is still a thundering dumbass.
Thankfully and suitably for the Master Kung Fu, they've really upped their game here. The combat is fast and fluid, it's well choreographed and well edited, so the fights actually do come off as brutal but coherent, which is no small feat because so many Hollywood action films fall at that hurdle. An opening scene with Shang-Chi fighting off assailants on a bus is an easy standout from the film for how well it balances impressive martial arts with physical comedy and comedy in general. And it really kind of reminded me of some of the films of Jackie Chan, and that is an absolute compliment. The fight scenes are definitely a highlight, but there's other things to enjoy in the film as well, such as the villain, who is actually pretty interesting, and he managed to escape one of the common pitfalls with the Marvel Origins film, in that he's not just a dark mirror version of our hero. In essence, he is the real Mandarin. He's the father of Shang-Chi, the founder of the Ten Rings terrorist organization, and the possessor of the mystical 10 rings that gives him amazing power and has also allowed him to live for centuries. He was portrayed by Hong Kong actor Tony Leung. I thought he was fantastic. He was just a bit more layered than a lot of the Marvel villains, and I think that familial connection gave him a bit more depth too. And speaking of, our titular character is played by Simu Liu, who I hadn't seen in anything prior to this, but I thought he was pretty good. He's pretty charismatic. I think there were scenes where he had to show a bit of range and emotion, and I think he nailed those scenes as well. I did find the character a little bit lacking in general, but that's certainly no fault of the performer. And I think you can definitely see that he threw himself into the role physically, and I think it's easy to see that, and it also pays off in the movie. One character I loved was the character of Katie, played by Awkwafina. I've seen her in other roles, and I thought she was great, and I really liked her in this too. It was just really nice for a change to have a female comedic relief, and also have a comedic relief that I didn't find incredibly grating. I also really enjoyed her relationship with Shang-Chi, and I really appreciated that they didn't have a love story. Probably in the next film, but for this one, I really appreciated it, and it just made the film feel a bit more refreshing. There was other characters I really liked in this as well. I liked Shang-Chi's sister. I thought she was a real badass, and her action scenes were really cool. There's Shang-Chi's mother and aunt. They're also pretty good. It's a real family affair in this film, as you can see. I mean, Vin Diesel, for one, is going to love it.
There's always room for family.
The story in general was pretty decent. I'm not going to go into it for spoiler reasons, but I think it was written in a good way in that it sort of effortlessly told Shang-Chi's origins without it feeling forced or front-loaded. And I think they did a good job as well of kind of setting it in the MCU without being overt about the whole thing. I mean, we do get some character cameos. If you've seen the trailers, you probably know Wong and Abomination are in this. There's also another character that's in this that I won't spoil, but they were in it far more than I expected, and I thought it was a very enjoyable inclusion in the film. As a result of that, Shang-Chi ends up being the standalone film that it should be. It's not bending over backwards to connect to the universe and prove it belongs. People aren't going around referencing the Avengers or asking why they all turned to dust not so long ago. It feels like Marvel's in a process of rebuilding, and rather than latching onto the previous films, they just let the characters stand on their own and build a strong foundation. And that totally worked here. That being said, there are some post-credit scenes that hint that this character is going to have a place at the table going forward, and that's something to be grateful for, because somehow, despite 25 films and numerous TV series and God knows what else into the MCU, Shang-Chi manages to find fertile ground to plant itself in. Shang-Chi is one of the better Marvel origin films in that it stays true to the character and the genre that birthed him by embracing Asian culture and showing off an impressive array of martial arts combat, while also avoiding a lot of the pitfalls that we associate with these solo films. But here, the villain is actually interesting. The character's backstory doesn't come at the expense of the larger story, and it also doesn't sidetrack the film all that much. And certainly, something you could take away from this is the fact that the ending is a bit of an overblown CGI spectacle, but it didn't detract from the larger movie on the whole for me. It just felt like the movie deserved better given what preceded it. But if nothing else, Shang-Chi definitely makes the argument that these new heroes have a lot to offer, and that the MCU still has plenty left in the tank.